Hi, I'm Nancy Grace. Joining me now is Colonel Gary Howze, the director of the Florida Highway Patrol. Colonel, thank you so much for being with us. I'm very, very concerned about Constitutional Amendment 3. What is it, Colonel?
Constitutional Amendment 3 in Florida has to do with the authorization of recreational use marijuana. Specifically in Florida, being a constitutional amendment, it's a little different than something that traditionally would go through the legislative process.
That would be voted on in a general election that would make recreational use marijuana a constitutional right. And we have a lot of concerns with that, but it's unique in the fact in Florida, where a lot of states that have recreational use marijuana or legal marijuana, it's done through a statutory process where people's representatives throughout the state would vote and argue and eventually either pass a law or not, and it's controlled by statute. Where in Florida, it's a little unique in that if it passes, it would be a constitutional right, which would prohibit really any restrictions or statutory prohibitions of the use of marijuana. So it's a little unique.
So basically, voters are going to go to the polls and vote yes or no on a constitutional amendment to add to basically the Bill of Rights. I have a right to smoke pot.
Correct. Yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of unusual, and it's very overreaching, I believe, as far as as far as the law, because it would definitely be a right. And a lot of people throughout the years they've asked me personally and asked law enforcement, what's wrong with somebody being allowed to smoke marijuana in the privacy of their home. And the reality is there could be a lot depending on the circumstances. And we could be doing a lot more harm and harming others more than people realize. It's not an uneducated choice. The data from other states that's already gone down this road, like Colorado, California, the data's in that it has been a very negative impact on their quality of life in those areas around the country that's done that. And to be candid with you, we do not want to make Florida California. We see the impacts, societal quality of life impacts, and again, it's an educated choice for our voters, and we are encouraging them to vote no on this for a lot of unintended impacts.
Hold on. With me is Colonel Gary Howze. He's the director of the Florida Highway Patrol. You think he doesn't know about crashes? Right now in Colorado, who previously legalized pot, they're trying to reverse that because of the skyrocketing numbers of crashes, fatal crashes included, by people that were high on pot while driving. Now, Colonel Howze, I'm not making light of it. So if this passes, the Florida Constitution is going to guarantee you the right to religion, freedom of religion, the right to free speech, the right to assembly, and the right to smoke pot. Okay, that's unusual. You're talking about the right to smoke pot. Well, what about my right to drive on a roadway with my children in the car and not crash with somebody who plows into me high on pot? What about my rights? What about those, Colonel? Is there anything proposed to protect me and my children?
You're exactly right, Nancy. And, it's more than just a person's choice to get high or to be impaired. Many of those same people are going to be out on our roadways endangering everyone, like you just said. And also exposing us, our loved ones, to secondhand smoke and the stench that's associated with marijuana in public venues.
I'm not worried about the stank, okay? I ain't worried about that. I'm worried about the fact that 21% of all fatal crashes, this is according to AAA, 21% of all fatal crashes were connected to THC. What is THC? Tetrahydrocannabinol. That's pot. 21% of fatal crashes on the road connected to pot, Colonel?
You know, Nancy, in Florida, we have annually about 3,300 fatalities. We lose about 8 to 9 people every day on our roadways. And we know that at least a third of them are due to impaired driving. And as you pointed out, the THC levels and blood alcohol that we're testing on fatal crashes are just going up and up and up. And, you know, right now Florida has a medical marijuana law, which we've navigated pretty well. But with this amendment, if this passes, where it's someone's right to smoke marijuana, as you've noted, those impaired drivers are going to have what we call poly impairments. And marijuana, just part of the makeup of marijuana and the neurotoxins that's in that, it acts as a multiplier for other drugs, an enhancer of other drugs. So someone that's on an opioid or someone that's drinking alcohol or whatever the impairment is, when you put THC in the mix of that, it's an impairment multiplier. So a third of our fails right now are due to impaired driving, and that is going up and up and up. And with just the increased availability of marijuana, it's only going to multiply. It's a very scary situation.
Joining me is Colonel Gary Howze, the Director of Florida Highway Patrol. Look, you mentioned the smell of pot. Okay, I don't care. You're throwing me a lot of statistics, which are all true. I've investigated this very carefully. But as a crime victim myself, I know how it feels when you lose the one you love the most. It's no secret that my fiance was murdered shortly before our wedding many years ago. Now, I have my children. It's what I love the most. So as Colonel Gary Howze is throwing you all these statistics, I want you to pause one moment and think about how you would feel if a person high on pot plows into your car with your children in the back or your children in their car seat and robs them of their lives. We can change this. This doesn't have to happen in the state of Florida, but it's on the voters. They have to make the decision. Is it worth it? I want to tell you that a decade, 10 years after Colorado legalized the use of pot, cannabis, there is a desperate fight to reverse that. Why? Because of skyrocketing fatalities in car crashes and more pot-induced. You know, if you hear my friends 2 Chainz or Snoop talk about it, there's nothing wrong with pot. I'm not the church lady. I don't decide who goes to hell and who doesn't. But I can tell you one thing. Don't you get tired, Colonel Howze, of prosecuting vehicular homicides when people are high on pot? When you have to look at the victim's family and say, they were high on pot. What can I tell you? Your child, your son, your daughter, your mom is dead because this guy wanted to drive high on pot. Don't you get tired of that day after day after day?
You know, Nancy, it's heartbreaking, and one of the hardest jobs of any law enforcement officer, but especially a state trooper, is to have that knock on the door at night that to deliver that bad news that a loved one is not coming home. And it just breaks your heart. And, you know, there's a misnomer that, well, it's just someone smoking a little weed is no big deal. But, you know, the marijuana of today is not the same marijuana as of the 80s and the 90s. You know, back then, you know, you had like 4% THC levels. Now there's upwards of 25 to 30 times THC levels in today's marijuana. You know, it's not the same substance. And those impairments that's created by smoking weed is the exact opposite of what you don't want to have going on when you're driving a car. It slows down your hand-eye coordination, your depth perception, all the skills, your cognitive skills, your short-term memory, all those things that you need cognitively to operate a motor vehicle safely are all impaired by the use of marijuana having THC in your system. And to your point, and so sorry for your loss and the pain you've had to deal with, for being a victim of crime. But one of the most frustrating things is exactly what you're saying for a police officer, is to have an incident such as a DUI manslaughter case where somebody that's killed on a roadway is due to an impaired driver, and knowing that is a 100% preventable death. It's just heartbreaking.
You know, as I was studying and preparing to speak with you today, Colonel Howze, I discovered that in one study, now this is according to CNN, that emergency room treatments that were pot-related, emergency room, when you're going to the emergency room with your stomach cut open or a broken leg or a broken arm or a concussion and swelling to the brain, all of that, emergency room treatments because of pot-related incidents are up 475%. Repeat, 475%. Colorado did it, and they are desperately trying to reverse that. You know, typically, Colonel, I'm on the end of the case when the dead body has already been autopsied, the victim has been buried, the family's been grieving, and I'm taking some a-hole to court to prosecute him or her, hopefully to put them behind bars for life. And I quit wondering this many years ago. Why couldn't they just have fill in the blank? We can do that now, Colonel. You don't get very many opportunities to stop a crime, to stop a fatality before it happens. But the voters in Florida are actually getting that chance. They are getting that chance when they vote to vote against the Constitutional Amendment number 3. Again, I'm not the church lady. What you do in your privacy, on your own, is on you. But you get on the road and you crash into some lady driving her kid to pre-K. That's on you. And the only way the voters can stop this is to vote against Amendment 3. Right, Colonel?
100%, Nancy. And you're right in that it's really not an uneducated choice. One of our sheriffs said the other day that if you were wanting to go buy a car and you were looking at a car and you knew ahead of time that it had 5 recalls and the brakes weren't the best and the windshield was cracked and there was issues with the car, would you buy that car? And no, you wouldn't. You would not want to be in harm's way.
No way.
And here with this amendment, we know the condition of the car. We know it's impaired, and we know it's not safe. So why would you, in good faith, go put yourself in harm's way and make that choice? And your point earlier about about the negative effects. Also, we're seeing increased calls to the poison hotline. We're seeing property crimes and persons crimes increase in these areas where marijuana has been legalized. The black market of marijuana flourishes because it's cheaper. It's not taxed, so it really runs cover for your mega weed companies and then your black market to flourish.
And man, just think about it, Colonel. All these people making all this money hand over fist off a pot as we watch the fatalities skyrocket. And we're the ones that have to deal with the crime victims' families. We're the ones that have to take these cases to court when it could all be prevented. You know, I hope and pray that the voters are listening. Colonel, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Nancy.